I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, and let's get this sneak peek of the beta coming up.
Yeah, great. Can everybody hear me?
Loud and clear.
So can you see my screen here?
Also loud and clear.
This is basically, this is a new Python API client for NetBox. What I'm going to do is present like the API, how you call it, and then compare it to PyNetBox, which is the existing API client. So this is a very simple thing where we, just setting up to call the API. I've imported JSON here just for pretty printing. You don't actually need that. So what you do is you just do a NetBox client, you give the URL you're calling to, and then the token which you generate from within NetBox. And then this would just be, I'm calling sites here. So I just take that NetBox client, I call DCMI sites, and all is just like all the values from that. And I'm just going to print those out. If we run that, you can see here the JSON printed data and stuff from all the sites in demo data. Now this one and stuff is, again, just setting it up and stuff, but just showing the different types of API calls you could make. So this one is a list that would return the paginated list results from it. So you can get, so all returns all of them, list just returns a paginated. You can also do filtering on it. So like if you only want those sites within a certain region, you just give it the region ID, filter on that. Get, if you want one item, this is the ID 24. Create, you just give the values and stuff. You provide the required fields and stuff, and for the site stuff, that would be the name and the slug. And then you can include all the others. We have bulk create. You can create a list, an array value, a dictionary, and then just do a bulk create on all the items. And then again, like you have update and bulk update, delete, bulk delete. So pretty much all the functionality is there. And all the like DCIM sites, that's if you just follow along NetBox, it uses a NetBox naming convention for all the different values. Then here I'm going to show like the different PyNetBox and stuff. If you actually look like most of the regular calls and stuff, it just pretty much looks like a one-to-one mapping of PyNetBox. So here's the setup in the two cases. This is the NetBox one, this is the PyNetBox. And you can see both of them, you just give a URL, the token. Then the list, here is just this is the one I just showed and stuff for the NetBox Python filtered list. The PyNetBox uses a filter, but in the NetBox Python and stuff, you just still use the list. Both of them have the all, both of them have the get, create. So as you can see, it's pretty much it looks pretty much the same at this point with the one-to-one. Now, where you get different and stuff is this last part. I wanted to go into the code. So you see two different things here. Let me resize this a bit. So I'll call out two things here where you start getting into the differences when you call them and stuff. This one, when you reference in the NetBox Python, when you reference the data fields, you do it by array notation. So this would be like site underscore name to get the name. In PyNetBox, you would use the dot notation. So it's like site dot name. And then in update calls and stuff, in the NetBox Python, when you call the update, you provide the fields that you want to update, and it returns the record values. So in this case, we want to update the name, and I'm just putting a test on the end of it and stuff. In PyNetBox, so you have a record, and in that record, you would update the name, and then you would submit that record in the API call. So in this case, it would be sites update sites. Now, That chart showed the difference and stuff. One of the first questions people have was like, why? Why did we think about rewriting a library if it looks pretty much the same and stuff? It really comes down to two things with maintainability and flexibility. So the maintainability, the API client really does two things. It just takes the data from NetBox, and then in the case of NetBox, it converts it into some data structures for user access. And one of the things that they both do, they get the data from NetBox, but the problem with the NetBox when it does that data conversion, that's where a lot of the bugs and stuff have come into play. So recently and stuff with the NetBox 3.3, where it changed the cable types and stuff, that ended up breaking NetBox. The NetBox Python and stuff, since it doesn't do the data conversion, it should work with pretty much any past and future NetBox versions. So no matter what changes are in NetBox and stuff, it should pretty much work. If a new API endpoint is added, it would be really quick and stuff to add it into it. Also, flexibility-wise, people have asked about, some of them asked about adding like a data typing to it. And that would actually be a little bit difficult in NetBox. It's doable, but in NetBox Python and stuff, it would be much more straightforward and stuff to add that on top in a separate library. So really that is my presentation. I know I went through it pretty quick and stuff. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
That was really good, Arthur. I like that you stole my question, which was going to be the why. So I appreciate you anticipating that. Ryan, looked like you had your hand up for a second there. Did you still have a question?
No, I just left it out from before, sorry.
Okay, cool. So for those of you who aren't aware, that the Python bit here is really a wrapper that allows you to programmatically interact with the API a little bit easier through Python. So if you're not into scripting yet, if you're just getting into your network automation journey, you'll find packages like that help you interact with NetBox Pythonically. I think that's a word. So those are really cool things to check out. And we do have a couple questions going on here in chat. Mr. Schulman, did you want to come on and ask those, or would you prefer if I take them?
Yeah, no, I can ask them. The first one was, does this client support async IO?
Not currently. That's something that could definitely be added. Pretty straightforward and stuff if people want that.
Yeah, I mean, mostly everything I've been doing has been async IO based. It makes things a billion times faster. And so kind of like once you go down the async IO path, you kind of have to do async IO almost everywhere. And so having client library support async IO as an option has been, really helpful if it's possible.
Yeah, definitely could look at it.
Yeah. And then the second question I had was, does this client download the Swagger spec, the Open API spec from the server to formulate its programmatic interface, or is these objects and methods kind of coded into the client directly?
Yeah, it doesn't download the Swagger spec. It doesn't depend on that. So it just does it directly.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. Brian had a question of speed between NetBox and NetBox client. Did you want to come on and get into that a little bit, Brian, or are you happy with me summarizing?
That's pretty much it.
All right.
Just curious if you've done any performance testing.
Yeah, it should actually be pretty much basically comparable. I don't think that you would see really any, performance differences between the two, because they're really just like calling NetBox and getting it over the API. There's in pagination and stuff, a little bit more flexibility in the new one. You can just set the limits and stuff and control it a little bit more granular.
Awesome. Any other questions for Arthur? Very good.